They always said I was the selfish one, the daughter who didn't understand sacrifice, who asked for too much and gave too little. But what they really meant was, I stopped being useful. I stopped handing over my money, my silence, my loyalty, just because we shared blood. What they didn't expect was that I'd inherit something more than a house, I'd inherit the truth. And once I found out what they'd been hiding, there was no going back. I was 7 the first time they left me on Margaret's porch. It wasn't framed as abandonment, not out loud, anyway. My mom said it was just for a little while, because things were complicated at home, and Margaret had always said I was welcome. They didn't ask if I wanted to go. They didn't ask Margaret either, not really. She opened the door to find me standing there with a Hello Kitty suitcase, wearing mismatched socks and clutching my favorite book. "She's always been good with you," Mom told Margaret as she handed over my allergy meds and a grocery bag of clothes. "And we just need some space to get back on our feet." I watched Margaret's face shift, concern, confusion, a kind of tired resolve, and then she crouched down to my level and said, "Well then, I guess we'd better make some cocoa." That was the beginning of what would become a pattern. For most of my childhood, I was what my parents offloaded when life got hard. When Caleb got sick. When Dad lost another job. When Mom needed time to herself that suspiciously lined up with weekend getaways. I was left at Margaret's again and again, always with some excuse, always with the promise of just for a week or two. The weeks stretched. Sometimes into whole summers. Once, into a full school year. And Margaret, bless her, bewildered and impossibly patient, never turned me away. She had no children of her own, but with me, she became everything a child could need, soft and stern, warm and unwavering. She knew how to ask if I was okay without using words. She let me pick lavender from her backyard and taught me how to press it into paper. She signed me up for a painting class at the community center, then showed up to every class like it was a Broadway premiere. The house on Birch Hollow Road became my second skin. The porch swing was my sanctuary. The ivy wallpaper in the upstairs bedroom watched me grow up. At home, if you could call it that, things were different. My parents loved the idea of family. They just hated the maintenance. They said things like we're a team and we all make sacrifices, usually right after asking for a loan or reminding me how expensive it had been to raise me. My brother, Caleb, was the golden child. He didn't ask for much because he didn't have to. When he wanted to switch majors, again, it was met with encouragement. When I said I was applying to out-of-state colleges, Mom asked who I thought I was trying to impress. I stopped arguing when I was around 14. I learned it was easier to nod and pretend I understood. At 15, my father lost another job. I came home from school one day and the house was in chaos, bills piled on the kitchen table, my mother's voice rising in frantic shrill waves. They fought for hours. 2 days later, I was back on Margaret's porch. She didn't ask questions. She just made tea and let me sit in silence. She never said anything bad about my parents. Not once. But sometimes, she'd watch me for a long moment before quietly asking, "When's the last time someone told you you were enough?" I never had an answer. I started calling her my aunt around that time. It just felt right. My real family acted like I was a problem to be managed. Margaret treated me like a person. By 16, I spent more time at her house than my own. She helped me prep for SATs. She drove me to writing workshops. She slipped $20 bills into my coat pockets with notes that said "for coffee" or "for poetry." She made space for me, in her home, in her heart, in a world where I had been trained to shrink. The last summer before college, I painted the back porch lavender. She didn't ask why. She just smiled and helped me tape the edges. I told her it was the color of peace. I didn't know how to thank her. Not really. I tried with little things, doing dishes without being asked, baking her favorite lemon muffins, telling her she looked nice when she wore her old turquoise earrings. Once, near the end of that summer, she turned to me and said, "I don't know who you'll grow up to be, Lily. But I know she'll be brave. And I know she'll be kind." And when the time comes, I hope you remember that love should never make you feel small. I held on to that sentence like it was a lifeline. That fall, I started college a few hours away. I lived in a dorm with thin walls and a roommate who played country music at full volume. I called Margaret once a week. We talked about everything and nothing, her garden, my classes, the way the air smelled different in October. At home, things with my parents were distant. When I visited over break, they asked about my grades with detached interest. When I mentioned Margaret, my mom changed the subject. Still, I told myself it would get better. That I'd graduate, find a job, and finally be able to breathe. I didn't know, back then, that everything was about to change. That Margaret would get sick. That my parents would come back, not with love, but with expectations. That they would expect me to give up the one thing I had ever been given, the one thing that was mine. But all of that came later. For now, there was lavender on the porch. And someone who believed in me. When you're a child, you don't always realize what's missing until you spend time with someone who gives it to you freely. At Margaret's house, there was always a place set for me at the table. Not just literally, though yes, she used real linen napkins and her chipped blue china, even when it was just the two of us eating soup and crackers, but in every way that mattered. I was spoken to like a person. I was asked how I felt, not just how I performed. She looked me in the eyes and waited for my answers like they were worth something. The contrast to my parents' house was jarring once I noticed it. At home, meals were eaten in front of the TV. Conversations were transactional: who was driving who, how much I'd chipped in for groceries, whether I'd gotten a job yet. Compliments came laced with backhands. You've lost weight. Maybe now you'll get a boyfriend. Or, Caleb never gave us this kind of trouble. Margaret didn't say those things. She said, your mind is quick and your heart is big. That's a rare combination, Lily. Don't let anyone tell you it's a flaw. When I was 9, she enrolled me in the Maple Glen Spelling Bee. I came in second. I cried all the way home, not because I'd lost, but because I knew if I'd won, maybe my parents would have shown up for once. Margaret let me cry. Then she made chamomile tea and said, second place is just first place with more humility. I didn't understand what she meant, but I liked the way it sounded. That was her magic. She made even disappointment feel less sharp. She taught me things slowly, like secrets shared between co-conspirators: how to knead bread, how to write a proper thank you note, how to read people by watching their eyes and their hands. People lie with their mouths, she'd say, but their hands will always tell you the truth. She let me shelve books at the shop when I was tall enough to reach. Every summer, I'd help her change the front window display, seasonal themes, handwritten signs, paper butterflies taped to the glass. She'd let me pick the centerpiece book each time. One summer, I chose Jane Eyre. I was 12 and didn't really understand it, but I liked how Jane spoke plainly, even when her voice trembled. At night, we'd read together. She had a worn leather armchair she called the story seat, and I'd curl up beside it with a blanket. Sometimes she'd read aloud. Sometimes she'd let me take over. When I got too nervous and stumbled, she never corrected me, just sipped her tea and smiled like I was telling the best story in the world. By 13, I was spending every school break with her. My parents barely called. Caleb got into a private high school 2 towns over. They found the money somehow, for his tuition, his apartment, even a used car to get him around. When I asked why I couldn't go too, Mom said, we have to invest in the one with real potential. I stopped asking after that. Margaret knew, of course. I never told her outright, but she saw things. She'd leave extra cash in envelopes labeled just in case. She helped me apply to a nearby public school in Maple Glen when I turned 15, said it made more sense, since I was there most of the time anyway. I didn't argue. I was tired of pretending my parents would suddenly become the kind that packed lunches or remembered my choir recitals. Margaret made me a lunch every day. Even when she was busy with the shop. She'd slip little notes inside, don't dim your light. Books make good armor. You're allowed to take up space. At school, I didn't have many friends. I wasn't bullied, I just didn't know how to be close to people. I was used to earning attention by being useful, agreeable, invisible. I learned how to shrink to fit other people's moods. But with Margaret, I didn't have to. She noticed when I looked tired. She asked if I was eating enough. She kept lavender by my pillow because I told her once that it made the bad dreams go quiet. One winter, she taught me how to knit. I was terrible at it. Dropped stitches, uneven rows. But I made a crooked scarf in blue and gray. She wore it all season. Caleb came to visit that spring, for the first time in years. He stayed a single weekend, complained about the lack of internet, and told me I was lucky to be living rent-free. Margaret offered him tea. He declined. That night, I found her sitting quietly on the back porch. "He's angry," she said simply. "But not at you." "I know," I said. "He's mad that I got what he didn't. Even if he never wanted it." She looked at me then, long and soft, and said, "Love can't be rationed, Lily. But people will try. Especially the ones who never learned how to give it." I remembered that line years later, when my mother accused me of hoarding the inheritance. But we weren't there yet. Not then. Back then, it was still safe. It was tea and spelling bees and porches full of light. It was the quiet kind of love. The kind that lets you breathe. And for a while, it was enough. Margaret called him the golden one. Always with a fond shake of her head, a gentle smile. But I think even she wondered if the gold was real, or just a polished veneer. Caleb was 2 years younger than me, a bright kid with curly hair and that easy charm that came from never needing to dig for attention. He wanted for nothing: summer camp at Walnut Ridge, a guitar lessons, and eventually an art school near the city. All paid for by Cheryl and Frank, no questions asked. Meanwhile, I took night shifts at the bookstore, trying to catch up on student loans, convinced that college savings had been exhausted on his potential. I learned to whisper around them, to make my presence as small as possible. One afternoon, I was 19, standing beside Margaret in her kitchen while she made tea. I remember overhearing my parents on a crackling speakerphone in the parlor. "I've told you," Dad said, voice low. "They have to finish that visa program. That's top priority. Lily will understand." Mom's sigh drifted through. "Yes, but you have to remind her. Lily's always been super accommodating." Later that week, I came home from class to find he'd gotten a laptop. My help covered the price. Mom smiled and said, "Caleb's so lucky you were there to pick it up." What a generous sister. I forced a smile, even hugged him. Inside, I felt hollow. Because I'd helped train him. To expect. To demand. To consume. Until the idea of needing something never gave him guilt. Margaret must have sensed. I didn't tell her, but weeks later she surprised me with a knitted bookmark she made from leftover yarn. She tucked it inside my poetry journal and whispered, "Some gifts are meant to remind you of worth. Not payment. When illness whispers." That same summer, I noticed she got tired easily. The lavender porch light dimmed in her eyes. She paused mid-sentence, her hands shaking as she poured tea. Her diagnosis, early onset Alzheimer's, felt like betrayal. I took a leave from school. She was angry with me at first. She wanted me to finish. "Promise me you'll go back," she said, tears in her eyes. "I will." I moved in with her in town, took over the bookkeeping for the shop, made her meals, read her letters. And every night after I tucked her in, I'd sit on the porch swing, unable to breathe around the grief that was already beginning. Margaret died on a Sunday morning. I never imagined a house could echo with absence. After Margaret was gone, it did. It echoed in the soft creak of the floorboards that didn't have her step anymore. In the click of the kettle left cold on the stove. In the unopened mail with her name still on it, Margaret Elaine Rains, looping in that old-fashioned cursive only people from her generation seemed to have. The hospice nurse called it a peaceful passing. She'd fallen asleep after a warm bath and never woke up. I was in the kitchen making chamomile tea when it happened. For a long time I blamed myself for not being beside her. But Margaret wouldn't have wanted me to watch her go. She believed in gentle exits. What followed was a blur: condolences from neighbors, casserole dishes I didn't touch, legal papers I couldn't process. It was the lawyer, Mr. Cohen, who sat me down a week after the funeral. Margaret left her estate to you, Lily. The house. The bookstore. All of it. I blinked. All of it? She was very clear. No liens. No debts. It's yours. She also left this. He handed me a flash drive in a plain manila envelope. She said you'd know when to open it. I took it with shaking hands. Back at the house, I waited until after dark. I sat at the old oak desk in the living room, plugged the flash drive into my laptop, and opened the folder labeled for Lily. There were PDFs, scanned letters, loan receipts, bank statements. And suddenly, the weight of everything crashed in. My parents had borrowed tens of thousands from Margaret over the years, tuition payments labeled for Caleb, checks titled housing assistance. They never told me. They'd taken the money and used it for my brother. They let me believe there was nothing. That there wasn't enough. That I was the problem, too expensive, too needy, too much. And still Margaret had tried. Tried to give me a life, even through them. I sat there for hours, staring at the digital evidence of my childhood rewritten. Then I found the letter. A scanned page, handwritten in Margaret's slanted script. Dearest Lily. I know you'll find this when I'm no longer there to explain. But I want you to understand why I left everything to you. It isn't out of spite. It's out of clarity. I've watched you give so much to people who've only taken. I couldn't let you walk into adulthood thinking love means sacrifice. This house, this shop, this life, it's yours. Not to prove anything. Not to repay anyone. Simply because you are worthy. You were always the one who stayed. The one who cared. The one who saw me when I began to fade. Don't let them rewrite you. Don't give them the pen. With all my love, always. M. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. For the first time in my life, I felt something unfamiliar, unfiltered grief tangled with unmistakable love. And in that stillness, I made a vow. They would not take this from me. Not again. They arrived unannounced. I was in the backyard raking leaves when I heard a car door slam. I paused, squinting toward the front of the house. The late afternoon sun bounced off a silver SUV I didn't recognize, rental, probably. Then I saw her, Cheryl, stepping out in a pastel windbreaker, a Tupperware container in hand. Frank followed, carrying 2 suitcases like he was arriving for a long weekend. My stomach dropped. Well, this is cozy, Mom said, eyeing the porch with a half smile. Still smells like her, Dad added, not unkindly. I didn't move from the yard. I kept the rake in my hands, like it could shield me from them. I wish you'd told us she passed, Mom said softly, as if I'd committed some great betrayal. I did, I replied. I sent an email. And the obituary link. She blinked. Oh. I must have missed it. I didn't say anything. Just watched as they walked up the steps, letting themselves in. Inside, it began. They touched everything, bookshelves, tabletops, the old roll-top desk. Mom opened the curtains in the living room. Too dark in here, she said. Some warm neutrals would really open the space. Frank wandered into the back room. You could turn this into a guest suite, he mused. Maybe rent it out. You could bring in some real money. I stood in the kitchen, clutching a tea mug, numb. They stayed 4 days. They brought groceries I didn't ask for. Rearranged the pantry. Offered to help sort the legal stuff, though I assured them everything was already handled. At dinner, they brought up the house. Don't get me wrong, Mom said, slicing into lasagna, this place is charming. But it's a lot to maintain. Have you thought about selling it? You could get something smaller, Dad added. Or closer to Denver. With your experience, you'd get a decent price. I'm not selling, I said. The silence that followed was long, sharp. Well, Mom finally said, we just want what's best for you. That night, I found her in the study, clicking through folders on my laptop. When she noticed me, she closed the screen too quickly. Just checking the weather, she said, too brightly. I didn't believe her. By day 4, the mask slipped. I've been meaning to ask, Dad said over breakfast. With Caleb finishing his program and all, he might need some help for a bit. Rent's high these days. I stared at him. Are you asking me to help support him? He shrugged. We're just brainstorming. Mom smiled like she was trying to read me. I always told Margaret you'd be the one to keep the family strong. Something in me snapped. I stood up. I'm going for a walk, I said. Alone. I left before they could follow. In the woods behind the house, the leaves had turned gold and amber. I walked until the voices in my head quieted. Until I could remember that this place was mine. Not a charity prize. Not a shared asset. A gift. A trust. A line in the sand. When I returned, the house was quiet. They were packing. No apology. No hugs. Just, we'll talk soon. I watched them drive away. And I knew they'd be back. I hadn't spoken to Caleb in weeks. We weren't close, not in the way siblings sometimes are. He was the golden child, the prodigy. The one who got piano lessons and private school, while I stayed behind with public buses and guilt trip dinners. But he wasn't cruel. Just distant. Absorbed. Removed. That's why the letter I received from him surprised me very much. It was an audio recording. Background noise, clinking glasses, laughter, silverware scraping on ceramic. Then Cheryl's voice. She actually bought it, can you believe it? A deep chuckle. Frank. Hook, line, and sinker. Guilt always works on her. My breath stopped. She'll wear herself out in that old house. We'll let her play at being independent until she's exhausted, then swoop in. Say we'll help. Take over. She won't fight back, Frank added. She never does. And once she gets married? Cheryl laughed. We guilt the husband too. Easy. They laughed together. It was the kind of laugh you hear from strangers, in shadows, just before the world shifts forever. I paused the file. Then played it again. And again. Until I couldn't anymore. I sat there for hours. Not crying. Not screaming. Just unraveling. Thread by thread, the version of family I had tried to preserve dissolved into something bitter and unrecognizable. They never wanted to help. They wanted to claim. To occupy. To leech. They'd seen Margaret's gift not as a legacy, but as a loophole. An opportunity. And the worst part? I'd almost let them. If not for Caleb. That night, I made a new list. Contact my lawyer. Freeze accounts. Redirect mail. Cancel my number. List the house, quietly, fast. I didn't call Caleb. Not yet. But I folded his note and placed it inside my journal. Not because I forgave him, but because I finally understood something. He hadn't known. But now, he did. And he had chosen to tell me. That mattered. I didn't tell Jules. I didn't tell Caleb. I didn't even tell myself, not out loud, that I was leaving. Not yet. But my body knew. It moved with purpose. With a quiet that felt surgical. I called my lawyer, the same one who'd handled Margaret's will. She was discreet. Professional. fierce behind soft eyes. I need to sell the house, I said. And I need it to happen quietly. She didn't blink. I'll make the calls, she replied. Keep everything off market. Then I opened a new bank account in a different city. Transferred funds. Redirected mail. Paid for a P.O. box in cash. Rented a secure storage unit under a new name, Margaret L. Books, LLC. It felt absurdly cinematic. It also felt necessary. Selling a home is usually emotional. But not this one. Not after what I knew now. Not after the Prague voicemail. Not after the years of gaslighting, the lifetime of conditional affection, the endless cycle of guilt and sacrifice. I still remembered their laughter. The way Mom said guilt always works on her, like she was ordering a coffee. I didn't cry when the house was listed. I didn't cry when the first offer came in. But I cried the night before the movers arrived. Because this had been Margaret's. Because the porch light still flickered in the evening like it was waiting for someone. Because somewhere in the attic, her favorite mug, the one that said "Book Witches Do It with Spells and Shelves," was still wrapped in tissue paper I hadn't dared unfold. I let myself mourn for exactly one night. Then I got up, packed, and left. My parents still didn't know. I blocked them on every platform. I disconnected my number. I scrubbed my digital footprint. I left a letter with my lawyer. If they ever contacted her, she'd send them a single paragraph. Lily Martin has exercised her legal rights in full accordance with her inheritance. She requests no further contact. Any attempt to dispute her decisions will be met with legal recourse. She even printed it on thick stationery. The kind that says, "This isn't a threat. It's a conclusion." I drove out of Maple Glen at 4:37 a.m. The Civic was full: books, notebooks, 3 boxes of Margaret's hand-labeled tea jars. I didn't look back. There was no one to wave goodbye. No one but me. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. The first night in my new place, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't the mattress, although it squeaked every time I exhaled, or the streetlight that blinked like a dying firefly outside my window. It was the quiet. The kind of quiet that used to mean something was wrong. In my parents' house, silence meant punishment. It meant disapproval. It meant I'd said too much, or not enough, or failed to read the invisible rulebook they kept rewriting. Now, silence just meant silence. And I didn't know what to do with that. The apartment was temporary. Furnished. Barely. A short-term rental across state lines, booked under a name I hadn't used in years, Lily M. Bennett, the name Margaret used to scribble on envelopes when she sent me postcards from bookstores she loved. It smelled like lemon cleaner and something slightly metallic. I set my suitcase down and stood in the center of the room for a long time, holding my own arms like a makeshift anchor. I hadn't escaped. Not yet. I'd just removed myself from the scene. Monica, my therapist, said this was normal. Your body's still in fight or flight, she told me over a Zoom call, her voice low and rhythmic, like waves smoothing sand. It doesn't know yet that the danger's past. I didn't believe her. But I wrote it down. Each day, I wrote one truth I wasn't brave enough to say out loud. They didn't protect me. They protected their comfort. I wasn't selfish. I was surviving. Love doesn't make you small. Help isn't love. Guilt isn't love. Control isn't love. Some days, I couldn't stop writing. Other days, I stared at the ceiling and felt nothing at all. They called. 67 times in 2 weeks. From different numbers. From landlines. From Caleb's phone. I didn't answer. Eventually, Cheryl left a voicemail I couldn't ignore. We're coming to Maple Glen. We need to talk. We deserve answers. I saved it. I forwarded it to my lawyer. She called me 5 minutes later. They don't know the house is sold, she said. No, I replied. But they will. I sent them a letter. Typed. Plain. Formal. I told them the house was sold. That they had no legal claim. That I required no further contact. That any communication would go through my lawyer. I signed it Ms. Lillian Bennett. They knew what that meant. What I didn't send, but wrote anyway, was this. You told me love meant sacrifice. That being a daughter meant giving without question. That family meant I should be proud to hurt myself to help you. But love, real love, doesn't feel like a choke collar. It feels like lavender and quiet mornings and someone who tells you, you are becoming. And I'm not going back. I didn't want to see them again. Not after the letter. Not after the voicemail. But they didn't stop. Even after I moved, even after I blocked every number, they found cracks to crawl through, emails from burner accounts, voicemails from Caleb's phone, letters sent to my lawyer with requests that bled into demands. They hadn't changed. They were just regrouping. Monica, my therapist, said sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose the battlefield. Control the terms. Name your boundary out loud, not for them, but for you. So I told my lawyer to send one message, I will agree to meet once. Public place. 1 hour. After that, all communication ceases permanently. We met at a diner off Route 46. Neutral ground. Fluorescent lights. No emotion in the decor, no nostalgia in the walls. I chose it for the sterility. For the lack of memory. A place where nothing of me existed. I got there 10 minutes early. Chose a booth in the far corner, back to the wall, view of the door. The waitress poured me a cup of coffee I didn't ask for. I nodded and said thanks anyway. When Cheryl and Frank arrived, they looked confused, like they'd been expecting a different version of me, the soft-spoken daughter who apologized too fast and said yes too easily. They found someone else. Lily, Cheryl said, her smile like cellophane. You look thin. Frank gave a practiced sigh. Let's not waste time. This could have been handled better. You don't get to start, I said calmly. You're not in charge here. That stunned them into silence. I pulled out my phone. I want you to hear something. I played the recording. The one Caleb had sent me, the one he found by accident and couldn't believe until he played it 3 times. He'd forwarded it with a message that simply read, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. It started with laughter. Cheryl's voice, crisp and smug, she'll sign anything if you make her feel guilty enough. Frank followed, give it a year. She'll be so worn down, she'll beg us to take it off her hands. And the kicker, Cheryl again, or she'll get married. We can guilt the husband too. When the audio stopped, the diner was quiet. Just the clink of a fork in the kitchen and someone's coffee being refilled behind us. Cheryl's eyes were wet, but not from shame. From being caught. You're taking that out of context, she said. We were joking. You were strategizing, I said. About how to drain me. Again. Frank's voice was sharp now. You wouldn't even have that house if not for us. No, I said. I wouldn't have this trauma if not for you. I reached into my bag and slid over a folder. Inside, the deed. The sale confirmation. A typed statement from my lawyer confirming all ownership transfers. I sold it, I said simply. It's done. Their mouths fell open. You're just going to throw your family away? Cheryl whispered. I'm reclaiming myself, I said. You taught me that love meant sacrifice. That the only way to be good was to be empty. I stood. I'm done being emptied. I left the folder. Left the coffee. Left them. Walked into the chilly afternoon air, heart hammering. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like freedom. Real and raw and terrifying. But mine. After the diner meeting, I thought I'd feel triumphant. Relieved. Lighter. Instead, I felt hollow. I'd spent my entire life trying to make them love me, then another year trying to forget that they didn't. Standing up to them didn't undo the damage. It just stopped the bleeding. Healing, it turned out, wasn't a single moment. It was a long, quiet walk through a forest I didn't recognize, with no map, no compass, and only the echo of my own voice to keep me company. I poured everything into a journal. Not the tidy kind with affirmations and floral stickers. A rough, spiral-bound notebook filled with unfiltered sentences. Some shaky with grief, some sharp with rage. All of them mine. That's where the idea for the workshop came from. It started as a sentence I scrawled across the page after a therapy session. No is a full sentence. The next page held more. Love isn't financial dependence. Family doesn't mean ownership. I don't owe anyone my silence. I shared the idea with Monica. My therapist raised her eyebrows. A support group? A workshop, I said. Informal. Just women talking. Maybe I'm not the only one who grew up believing guilt was a form of love. She nodded slowly. You won't be. 2 weeks later, I booked the community room at the library. It was nothing fancy, beige walls, thin carpet, a rack of folding chairs that creaked when you moved. But it was private. Safe. Ours. 7 women came to the first session. I brought cookies from a local bakery. Tea bags. My notebook. I stood at the front, heart hammering, and told my story. Not all of it, just the shape of it. The outlines. Enough to say, you're not crazy. You're not alone. They listened. They nodded. Some cried. By the end, one woman raised her hand and said, "Can we do this again?" That was the beginning. I called it "No" is a full sentence. Each week, the circle grew. Women brought friends. One printed flyers. Another offered to cover the cost of tea next time. We talked about guilt, about financial traps dressed up as help, about parents who demanded rent from their kids but bailed out their sons. We talked about grief. Rage. And something quieter too, hope. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was creating. And then Caleb reached out. He texted me late one night, after one of the sessions. Just 5 words. Can we talk this weekend? I hesitated. Then typed back, yes. We met at a quiet cafe halfway between our cities. No parents. No pretense. He looked different, older, tired in a way that felt familiar. We ordered coffee. He didn't touch his. They lied to me, he said without preamble. They always said you wanted to go to Aunt Margaret's. That you loved being away. I didn't know. I said nothing. He looked up. I'm sorry, Lily. I should have asked. I should have seen it. I swallowed. You believed what they told you. He nodded. But I don't anymore. That conversation changed everything. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a sibling, not a rival, not a pawn. Someone who'd also been manipulated. Someone trying to understand. He asked questions. He listened. He said, "If you ever want help with your workshops, I'd love to support you." I smiled. I'd like that. That night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, looking out over the city. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. Of voices. Of change. Of women finding their words, including me. It came 3 days after Caleb left, after our long talk on the porch, after the kind of hug that says more than an apology ever could. I was starting to feel like I could breathe again when I opened my P.O. box and found the package. No return name, just a handwritten address from Maple Glen. I knew the street. Margaret's Street. Inside was a wooden box and a short note. Lily. She saved these. I think she meant for you to have them. Judith. Margaret's sister. The one who'd found me after a workshop. Who knew things about my family that I didn't. Who, it turned out, had her own quiet way of watching from the sidelines. I set the box on my kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. Then I opened it. It was full of letters. Dozens of them. All in Margaret's handwriting. Some yellowed with time, others still crisp. None had been mailed. The oldest was dated the summer I turned 10, the first time my parents dropped me off without saying when they'd come back. I'd cried for 2 nights straight until Margaret set up a tent of blankets in the living room and read me old Nancy Drew books until I fell asleep. Her letter from that week began. Lily is already stronger than she knows. Her parents don't see it. Maybe they don't want to. Some were addressed to me. Some were just journal entries. All of them were love letters, in their own way. They told the truth about my childhood, about how often my parents left me, how they made excuses for not coming back, how Margaret became more than just a stopgap. She became my only home. One letter described a night I barely remembered, how I'd asked if I could just live there forever, how Margaret had stayed up until 3 a.m. trying to figure out the logistics. In another, she wrote. They said she wanted to be here. That it was her idea. But Lily is a child. She just wanted to feel wanted. I read every word. I cried for most of them. I sat on the floor, surrounded by pages of the truth I'd lived but never fully understood, not until I saw it through her eyes. The guilt I'd carried for years started to unravel. She'd seen it. All of it. And she'd loved me anyway. One letter was dated the year before she died. Short, simple. I hope when she finds this, she knows I chose her. Not out of pity. But out of pride. That night, I called Caleb. He came over with takeout, and we read through the letters together. He didn't speak much, just held one page after another like they were sacred. I never knew, he whispered. They told me you liked going. That you needed more attention than they could give. I looked at him. They said I wanted to be gone. He nodded. They made me believe you were just different. Dramatic. Too sensitive. I wasn't, I said. I just didn't know how to pretend it didn't hurt. Before he left, Caleb put a hand on the lid of the box. She really did love you, didn't she? She's the reason I know what love is, I said. He didn't argue. He just hugged me again, tighter this time, and said, if there's anything I can do. I mean it. You're doing it, I said. I placed the box on my bookshelf, between a copy of Little Women and a battered volume of poetry Margaret once told me was too sad, and therefore necessary. I labeled the spine in gold ink. Margaret's heart. And that night, for the first time in months, I slept with the window open, light off, but heart wide awake. A full year had passed. 12 months since the keys changed hands. Since I walked away from the house on Birch Hollow Road with a packed car and a note on the table. Since I left behind the last vestiges of a life shaped by guilt, fear, and obligation. It had been exactly 365 days since I stopped answering to their version of me. I marked the date quietly. No big ritual, no celebratory dinner. Just a sunrise drive to Maple Glen, a cup of black coffee in the thermos Margaret once insisted made the best pour, and a bundle of lavender tied with twine. Margaret's grave was nestled under a sugar maple. The grass was neatly trimmed. Someone, Judith, maybe, had left a small ceramic owl near the base. I placed the lavender down gently and sat cross-legged on the soft earth. I didn't speak for a while. I just breathed. Then I pulled the letter from my coat pocket. It was handwritten on the same floral stationery Margaret used for years. I'd found one last sheet tucked inside the box Judith sent me. It felt right to use it for this. I didn't plan to leave the letter there. I wasn't even sure I'd read it aloud. But I'd written it the night before, sitting on the floor beside the same wooden box, thinking about everything she'd seen in me, and everything I'd finally come to believe. I opened it. Dear Aunt Margaret. It's been a year. I wanted to tell you I'm okay. More than okay, actually. I'm free. It's still a new feeling, this kind of freedom, like wearing someone else's coat until it slowly becomes yours. But I'm learning. The house is gone, but the space you gave me still lives in me. The bookstore shelves. The porch lavender. The quiet way you listened without ever needing to fix me. I think that's what real love is. Not fixing. Just witnessing. Staying. You stayed. And because of that, I stayed too. In myself. In this life. They don't know where I am. They don't control me anymore. Caleb and I talk now, we're rebuilding something honest, something we were never allowed to have. He's seen the letters. He knows the truth. He cried when he read how much you fought for me. I'm working again. Not just at a job, but on something I believe in. My workshops are growing, full of women who are just now finding their voices after years of being told they were too much, too soft, too expensive. I always thought healing meant forgiving them. But it doesn't. It means choosing myself anyway. You taught me that. Quietly. Fiercely. Completely. I miss you. Every day. But I carry you with me now, not as a wound, but as a root. Love always. Lily. I folded the letter and pressed it to my heart. Then I slipped it back into my pocket. I didn't need to leave it behind. She already knew. I stayed at the grave a little longer, watching the wind move through the trees, scattering golden leaves like confetti. I thought of all the summers we spent together. The way she'd hum when cooking. The tiny gold bell above the bookstore door. The day we painted the porch lavender just because she said it felt like joy. That's what this moment felt like, too. Joy, soft, earned, and completely mine. A month had passed since the anniversary letter. My workshops were flourishing, my relationship with Caleb was healing, and I felt, dare I say, settled. In a way, life had found its unexpected rhythm, and I was beginning to trust it. Then the voicemail came. It pinged through my new phone, an unmarked number, unfamiliar territory. I almost deleted it, but something held me back. I pressed play. In the background, a woman's laughter echoed softly, followed by a male voice that tightened my chest. Are you sure she didn't change her mind? Positive. She's staying put. But I think she's wavering. Maybe it's time to remind her who we are. Yes, talk to Caleb. He's still close enough. If he calls, you step in. Don't let her decide this without us. The words unspooled, a direct hit. My breath grew shallow. Talk to Caleb. Not for Caleb, through him. This was another attempt, a last gasping effort to pull me back. But this time it included deception targeted at my brother. Caleb was with me, poring over workshop notes when the voicemail buzzed. He paused work to listen. His face hardened, blood draining. I waited. He pressed delete. He looked at me with something fiercer than sorrow. They're still trying to use me, he said. They said I'd always listen to them. That I'd remind you who you were. I stared at him, stunned. They think you don't deserve this. That we don't deserve justice. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up his coffee cup. They won't talk to me, Lily. They lie to me too. This time, I didn't run. I reached out and took his hand. You did the right thing. He nodded. I'm sorry I believed them, he whispered. I squeezed his fingers. You didn't know. And now you do. That changes everything. The rest of the day, we were quiet. No tears. No shouting. Just shared resolve. We decided, together, that any future messages from them would be ignored or forwarded directly to our lawyer. No more safe spaces for them. That night, I wrote in my journal. It's no longer just about me. It's about us. I don't have to be their daughter. Caleb doesn't have to be their son. we get to be siblings. Whole and free. This is the final thread. And I'm ready to let go. I closed the journal and turned off the lights. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly owned by my own life. Spring came early that year. The city softened, buds on branches, wind that no longer cut but hummed, and a smell in the air like something was just about to begin. I was at the community center, stacking chairs after our largest workshop yet, over 60 women in attendance, when Judith showed up again. She hadn't changed much since our first meeting. Still wore that navy blazer like armor. But her eyes were gentler this time. I was cleaning out some of Margaret's old things, she said. Found this. Figured you should have it. It was a journal. Soft leather cover. Margaret's name etched in gold. She started it the year before you were born, Judith added. I waited until I was home to open it. The entries weren't daily. Some pages were full of tea-stained ramblings, others were just one sentence. But they were all unmistakably her. Funny, precise, fiercely observant. And then, about halfway through, I found this. April 14th. They dropped her off again. No warning. No note. Just a suitcase and a guilty smile. She didn't cry. Just sat on the porch and asked if we could make lemon tea. She's only 5, and she already knows what not to ask for. I will not let her think she is disposable. She is a symphony pretending to be background music. If no one else listens, I will. I closed the book, held it to my chest, and let myself feel every ounce of that sentence. A symphony pretending to be background music. On the 1-year anniversary of starting No is a full sentence, we hosted a public storytelling event. Caleb spoke. So did Judith. So did I. For the first time, I read my own story, start to finish, to a room full of strangers who understood every pause. Afterward, a young woman approached me. Early 20s. Nervous hands. I brought my sister, she whispered. She thinks it's her fault they used her. I looked her in the eye. It's not. Months later, I returned one final time to Margaret's grave. I brought lavender sprigs again, this time tied with a ribbon Caleb had picked out. I brought the journal. I brought a small framed photo from our workshop, the sign in the background said, "You are not too much." They were just not enough. I didn't stay long. Just long enough to breathe, to thank her, to tell her she was right. And as I walked away, I smiled. Because I wasn't walking away empty. I was walking away rooted.